Korean Mafia Boss pointed at the Black Waitress and said, "You're fired." What his mother did next changed everything. Chapter 1, The Morning Rush. The Golden Spoon Diner on East Kimball had survived 3 recessions, 2 ownership changes, and 1 fire that the insurance company had asked too many questions about. It survived because of its location, wedged between a dry cleaner and a bail bondsman on a block, were the kind of men who needed both services also needed breakfast. It survived because of its food, honest and unapologetic and hot. And it survived, in no small part, because of Zara Mitchell. Zara was 29, the kind of woman who had learned early that the world did not pause for you to catch your breath, so you learned to breathe while moving. She wore her uniform like armor. Crisp blue dress, white apron, her braids pinned back beneath the regulation cap, with a precision that suggested she had opinions about order. She had been at the Golden Spoon for 4 years, long enough to know every regular's order before they sat down, long enough to know which tables tipped in cash and which ones tipped in conversation, long enough to understand that the booths by the window, where the large men in expensive suits sat every Thursday morning, was not a booth she was meant to approach without an invitation. She had received no such invitation. But when old Mr. Ray's collapsed, in the middle of his eggs and toast, and the scramble that followed, left her covering 6 tables alone, and the booths by the window sat empty and clean and available, she didn't have time to remember the rule. She had a tray balanced on one hand, coffee pot in the other, and a dining room full of hungry people, and nowhere to put any of them. She made a decision in the half-second that decisions get made in, when the alternative is dropping 12 plates of pancakes. She seated a family of 4 in the window booth, a mother, a father, 2 small children, who were already pulling at the napkins. It was the most natural thing she had done all morning. It was also, as she would discover, approximately 11 minutes later, *2:00, the most consequential. They came at 7:43, which was the same time they always came, because men like this built their lives on the religion of routine. There were 4 of them in the advance, and then there was him. Shin Jae-hyun was 41 years old and had the kind of face that painters once would have called classical and that everyone else simply called dangerous. He wore charcoal. He always wore charcoal. His posture was the posture of a man who had never once, in his adult life, been told to wait. He looked at his booth, at the family in his booth, at the small child currently dismantling a sugar packet onto the table of his booth. The stillness that came over him was the specific stillness of a very powerful engine, idling before it decides what to do. He looked at the manager, Dennis, who had appeared from his office with the velocity of a man who had developed extraordinary reflexes for exactly this situation. Dennis looked at the family, looked at Shin Jae-hyun, made the calculation that took no time at all because it had only one answer. Then he looked at Zara, who was crossing the floor with a coffee pot and no idea that the morning had just changed shape. "Mitchell," his voice was low, careful, the voice of a man diffusing something. "You seated that table." It was not a question. Zara looked at the booth, looked at Shin Jae-hyun, felt the temperature of the room drop approximately 4 degrees. "Mr. Ray's had an episode," she said. "I needed the table. It was open." "It was not open," Dennis said. Shin Jae-hyun had not moved. He was simply watching this exchange with the patience of a man who had learned that watching was frequently more efficient than acting. His eyes moved to Zara, with the deliberate quality of a searchlight finding its target. "She's fired," he said. Quiet, conversational. The way you might note that it looks like rain. The diner went silent. Not the polite silence of people minding their business. The held-breath silence of people who understood that the air had become flammable, and no one wanted to be the spark. What happened next was not what anyone expected. Not Dennis, whose mouth was already forming the apology. Not Shin Yi-hyun's men, who had moved into the formation. They assumed when a decision had been made and required only execution. Not Shin Yi-hyun himself, who had not survived 30 years in his world by failing to anticipate what came next. And certainly not Zara, whose hands had gone very still on the coffee pot, while her chin had gone very level. The woman who had been sitting, unseen in the adjacent booth, partly obscured by the high banquette, stood up. She was perhaps 70, possibly older, the specific age of a woman who had earned every year and wore them as a particular kind of authority. She was dressed in a kimono of deep green silk with gold detail, which in a diner on East Kimball at 7:43 in the morning should have looked absurd. It did not look absurd. It looked entirely correct. She had silver hair arranged with the precision of someone for whom presentation was a discipline. Her eyes were bright and specific, and they were fixed on her son with an expression that Zara had seen before, had worn before, on the face of every woman who had ever loved someone difficult and was tired today of making it easy. "Yi-hyun," she said. Just his name, just that. The effect was immediate. Not in his posture, which remained exactly as it had been, but in something behind it. Something that recognized the voice. The way the body recognizes cold water. Instinctively and completely. He turned to look at his mother. Shin Yunya had not approved of a single decision her son had made in the past 20 years. She had also never stopped being his mother, which was the most ferocious thing about her. She crossed the floor with the measured pace of a woman who had nowhere she was rushing to because she had already arrived. She stopped beside Zara, looked at the coffee pot, still balanced in her hand, looked at her face, the composure, held there by something stronger than pride. Then she looked at her son. "This young woman," she said in Korean, the words precise and unhurried, was doing her job. In difficult circumstances. You will not speak about her employment. The silence that followed was a different silence than the one before. This one had weight. Shin Yi-hyun looked at his mother for a long moment. Around them, the diner held its breath. The small child in the booth had stopped pulling at napkins. Even the sugar packet was still. Yi-hyun's expression had not changed in any visible way. And yet something had shifted in the architecture of the room. The way a building shifts before you can measure it with instruments. He looked at Zara. "My usual table," he said. As if the last 90 seconds had not occurred, his men moved. The family was relocated with the efficiency of people who understood they were in the middle of something and were being offered a graceful exit. Dennis materialized from wherever Dennis went during moments of crisis, already holding 2 menus and performing the smile of a man, deeply relieved to be performing a smile. Zara stood where she was. Her hands had stopped shaking, which she noted with a distant satisfaction, because she had told them to. Shin Yunya had not moved either. She was still beside Zara, and now she was looking at her with an attention that felt entirely different from the assessment her son had delivered. His had been the assessment of a man deciding a thing's value. Hers was the assessment of a woman recognizing something she had been looking for and finding it unexpectedly. You didn't apologize, the older woman said. Not an accusation, an observation. The tone of a scientist nodding. A result that confirms a hypothesis. Zara looked at her. I didn't do anything wrong, she said. It was the simplest truth available. Shin Yunya's expression did not quite become a smile. It became something more specific than that. No, she agreed, you didn't. Come, you will bring me tea. And sit with me for 5 minutes. It was not a request. Zara looked at Dennis. Dennis, who was on the far side of the room already pretending to adjust the specials board, gave a single-minute nod. That meant in the language of management under pressure. Please do whatever this woman says. Zara brought the tea. She sat. Shin Yunya drank her tea. The way she did everything. With complete, unhurried attention. She asked Zara 4 questions. Where she was from, not as small talk, but as genuine inquiry. The kind that listens to the answer, instead of waiting to respond. What she had studied, because she had seen the textbook in Zara's bag when it slipped. As she sat down, accounting. 2nd year, night school. Zara said. The older woman nodded. As if this confirmed something. 3rd question, why she was here. Instead of there, meaning why. Was a woman studying accounting. Carrying a coffee pot. At 7:43 in the morning. Zara gave the honest answer. The one she usually dressed up. In more palatable clothes for strangers. Her mother's medical bills. Her younger brother's tuition. The specific mathematics of a life. Where you are both the foundation. And the one doing the building. Shin Yunya listened to all of this. Without the practiced sympathy. That people performed when they wanted to appear moved. She listened the way you listen. When information matters. 4th question, delivered. With her teacup set precisely in its saucer. My son told you that you were fired. What were you going to do? If I had not spoken. Zara considered this honestly. Finish my shift, she said. Collect my check. Find another table job. By Monday, she paused. And probably be furious. For a week and a half. The expression on Shin Yunya's face became the thing it had been moving toward. Since she stood up from her booth. It became warm, not performed warmth. The real kind, the kind that costs something. Good, she said, that is good. Across the diner, her son had been watching this conversation. With the focus he gave to things that fell outside his models of the world. Zara felt his attention the way you feel. A draft in a sealed room. A presence without a visible source. She did not look at him. She looked at his mother, who was watching her back, with the bright, specific eyes of a woman who had just decided something. The next Thursday, Zara arrived. At 6:30, as always. She prepped her station, folded her napkins, confirmed that the window booth was clean and correctly set, and would remain unoccupied until 7:43. This information she had acquired by the simple method of asking Dennis, who had told her everything she needed to know in 30 seconds, with the energy of a man, relieved to finally be doing something useful. She had also, she admitted to herself, in the privacy of her morning commute, spent time she couldn't afford, reading about Shin Jae-hyun. Not much was available. What was available was suggestive enough. He came at 7:43. His mother was with him. Which was new, she sat beside him. In the booth, instead of in her usual separate corner, which Zara also found new and noted. With the part of her that always catalogued the things that changed. Zara brought the coffee. The black, the way she'd been told. A tea service for Shin Yunya. She set them down with the efficiency of someone who had done this 10,000 times and intended to do it 10,000 more. She was turning to leave when Shin Yunya placed an envelope on the tray. "For your mother's account," she said, her voice quiet and final. Zara looked at the envelope, did not touch it, looked at Shin Yunya. "I can't accept that," she said. "You can," Shin Yunya said. "You will not be obligated by it. I am not my son. I give gifts because I choose to, not because I am owed." Zara looked at Shin Jae-hyun, who was looking out the window with the studied indifference of a man pretending not to be listening. "If you take it," he said, without turning from the window, "it means nothing except that my mother has decided she likes you, which is its own complication." It was, Zara thought, possibly the most honest thing a powerful man had ever said to her. She picked up the envelope, put it in her apron pocket. "Thank you," she said to Shin Yunya. Not to him, to her. The older woman's eyes held hers for one deliberate moment. Then she lifted her tea. Conversation over and begun. 3 weeks after the envelope, Zara was closing alone. The last customer had gone. Dennis had left at 9. The kitchen was the particular, intimate quiet of a space where the work was done, and only the aftermath remained. She was wiping down the counters when she heard the back door. Not breaking in, a key. The specific sound of a key, used by someone who had a right to use it, but preferred not to announce themselves. She did not panic. She picked up the largest pan available and turned around. Shin Yi-hyun stood in the kitchen doorway, in a suit that was no longer impeccable, his left hand wrapped in cloth that had been white and wasn't anymore. He looked at the pan, then at her face. "I need a phone," he said. "Mine is gone, and I need." He stopped, as if the next word was a country he wasn't sure. He had clearance to enter. "Sit down," Zara said. The same words you use for a stray animal and a person in shock, because the needs are the same. He sat on the stainless steel prep table with the automatic compliance of a man whose system had been running on protocol for too long and had just run out. Zara put the pan down, found the first aid kit, began unwrapping his hand. He watched her do this with an expression she couldn't categorize. "You should ask," he said. "What happened? You'll tell me what you want me to know." She said, "Asking the rest is a waste of both our time." Something moved in his face, brief and controlled. She focused on the wound, cleaned it, wrapped it, with the quiet efficiency she brought to everything that needed to be done correctly and without fuss. "My mother talks about you," he said. "She talks about the way you answered her questions. She said you have no performance in you." Zara tied off the bandage. "Is that a compliment? Where you come from, it's rarer than a compliment." He said, "In my world, performance is survival. Everyone performs. Everyone has an angle. Everyone wants something. And the wanting shapes everything they say." Before they say it, he paused. "You told her you'd be furious. For a week and a half. No one tells my mother the true inconvenient thing." Zara put the first aid kit away, handed him the phone from the wall. "Use this, I'll make coffee. You look like you need it." He took the phone, then quietly, "Why are you not afraid of me?" She turned back to the coffee machine. "I didn't say I wasn't afraid of you. I said sit down. Those are different things." Chapter 8, The Education. His mother began coming on Tuesdays too. Alone, without the men. Which Dennis had been advised was fine. In terms, he didn't need to verify. She and Zara had developed the specific ritual of two women who had recognized in each other a quality they respected and were taking their time. With the rest, Shin Yunya brought books sometimes, Korean novels that she translated, in loose, unhurried summaries, while Zara sat across from her in the slow mid-afternoon. In return, Zara explained accounting principles that the older woman absorbed with the focused pleasure of a person who had always loved learning and had simply learned in rooms most people never gained entry to. One afternoon, Shin Yunya said, apparently to her tea, he has been asking you about night school accounting programs. You was, Zara had gathered, the man who found things out. She set her cup down. Why? Shin Yunya looked up, with the expression of a woman who considered why to be a question with an obvious answer that she was choosing not to supply. He is also, she continued, reviewing the terms of the medical debt facility. Your mother's account uses. He has not told me this. I know because I still know everything. She said this with a calm that suggested she found her son's belief in his own privacy mildly but permanently amusing. Zara was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that happens when something lands, and you need to sit with where it lands. He should stop, she said finally. I appreciate he will not stop, Shin Yunya said simply. Once he has decided something is right, he does not stop. He is impractical in that direction. It is his one actual flaw. And also the thing I love most about him. Don't tell him I said that. She lifted her tea. Tell me again about amortization schedules. I find them clarifying. Chapter 9, the gala. The invitation arrived at the diner, which in itself was a statement. Not to her apartment, to the place where she worked. As if to say, all of you is invited. Not just the version you might dress up for unfamiliar rooms. The annual benefit for the Children's Literacy Foundation was, on paper, exactly what it claimed to be. In practice, it was also the room where the city's various powers sat in the same space and reminded each other, pleasantly, of the specific weight of their presence. Shin Yunya had called. Come, she had said. You will sit with me. Jae-hyun will be there. It is simply dinner. Zara knew it was not simply dinner. She went anyway, which was its own answer to a question nobody had quite asked yet. She wore the deep burgundy dress she owned for occasions that required her to walk into rooms that expected her not to. No borrowed jewelry. Her grandmother's earrings. Herself, exactly herself. And not 1 degree more decorated than that when she arrived. At the table in Shin Jae-hyun stood, which he had not done, for the other arrivals. His mother watched this with the expression of a woman running an exact mental calculation and finding the total satisfying. The evening was structured around tables of 10 and the particular performance of powerful people being publicly charitable. Zara navigated it the way she navigated everything that required more than she'd been given, by paying close attention and wasting nothing. The man who arrived at their table at the midpoint of the evening was named O.D. Sung, and he had the particular energy of a man who had decided in advance that the evening would go a certain way. He looked at Zara with the practiced assessment of a man who categorized by category and not by content. Jae-hyun, he said warmly, with the false warmth of men who operate as rivals. In the language of colleagues. I didn't know you were. Expanding your social circle. His gaze sat on Zara. For half a second too long. Shin Yunya's hand had stilled on her fork. Shin Jae-hyun had stilled entirely. The way he did before temperatures changed. Zara put down her wine glass. Zara Mitchell, she said pleasantly, extending her hand to Oh Sung. I work in financial analysis. She watched him process this. I was particularly interested in the Q3. Restructuring of O capitals. Eastern portfolio, she continued. The Meridian asset transfer. Was creative, though I imagine. The regulatory review. Was an interesting morning. She smiled. The specific smile of a woman who has just placed a card on the table and is waiting to see if her opponent folds or raises. Oh Sung looked at her with an expression that had changed considerably since he arrived. Impressive, he said finally. Then, because he was a man who understood the table had shifted, he nodded and moved on. Shin Yunya picked up her fork. Financial analysis, she said to Zara. Night school, Zara said. Same curriculum. Beside her, she heard Shin Jae-hyun. Exhale once. Short and controlled. She did not look at him, but she felt him looking at her. Chapter 10, The Truth in the Kitchen. They ended up in the kitchen again. Not the diner kitchen this time. His penthouse kitchen, after the gala. After his mother had retired. With the timing of a woman. Orchestrating an exit. She had planned 3 hours earlier. He had offered her a car home. She had said she'd wait for a cab. He had said the car was faster. She had said she knew what he was doing. He had said good. So she was in his kitchen, which was the size of her apartment, watching him make tea, with the focused attention of a man for whom making tea was currently the only available task. That was not too large to hold. You knew about the Meridian transfer, he said. Yes, that's not public information. No, she agreed. It's the kind of information that exists in the places where public information doesn't bother going. I'm studying accounting. I read the footnotes. He turned from the kettle, looked at her, the calculating look that she had learned to read as him arriving at the true version of a question, rather than the version he'd initially asked. Why are you still here? Not in the kitchen, she heard that. Here, meaning inside. The circumference of his life, which had been expanding around her. By degrees she had been watching, with a precision equal to his own. Zara sat on the kitchen stool, crossed her arms, gave him the true answer. Because that was the only kind she'd been raised to give. And the only kind worth giving. Your mother saw something in me. The morning you told me I was fired. Something she recognized and decided mattered. I stayed because she was right to see it. And I didn't want to prove her wrong. She held his gaze. And then I stayed because the more I knew, the more I found that the person underneath, the room you walk into, is someone I wanted to know better. That's the true answer. You asked for it. He stood with the tea. He had never poured. I told you that you were fired. He said, because you were in my space. And I wanted you moved. I have not wanted you moved since approximately 3 minutes later. I want to be clear about that. Your mother told me, Zara said. Of course she did, he said. A pause that was different in quality from the pauses before it. She is never wrong, he said. About what matters. No, Zara agreed. She isn't. Chapter 11, The Threat. Oh Sung had not forgotten. The table, men like that, did not forget tables. They catalogued them and waited for the right geometry of circumstance. The right geometry arrived. On a Wednesday, 2 weeks after the gala, in the form of a man, waiting outside the diner. When Zara finished her closing shift, he was polite about it. They usually were, at first. He said he had a message from someone who wanted her to understand the full shape of the situation she was in. He said it would be better for her family if she stepped back from certain associations. He said this quietly, in a way that was designed to feel like concern. Zara listened to all of it. Then she said, "Give me a moment," took out her phone, and called the number that Shin Yi-hyun had given her. The night in the kitchen. She described what was happening. Where she was, the man's face. His words, verbatim. The way you describe things. When accuracy is the entire point. Then she put the phone on speaker, so the man could hear what was said next. She did not do this out of fear. She did it because she was a woman who understood leverage, as well as any accountant who had read enough footnotes. The man's face changed. He left without the conversation he had intended to have. Shin Yi-hyun was there in 11 minutes, which meant he had been moving. Before she finished the description, he looked at her on the sidewalk, her coat on, her bag on her shoulder, her expression the composed, watchful expression he had been learning to read. For 2 months, "Are you hurt?" "No, are you frightened?" She considered this with the seriousness the question deserved. "I'm angry," she said. "Which is different." He looked at her. "Yes," he said, "it is." He reached out. Not impulsively, deliberately. The way he did everything. Took her hand, not a gesture of possession. A gesture of someone crossing a distance they had been measuring for a long time, and finally deciding. The measure was complete. "Come inside," he said. "We need to talk about what comes next. We need to talk about what I want to come next." Zara said, "And then we can talk about what you want." He almost smiled. It was becoming a more common occurrence. The almost smile. "After you," he said. Chapter 12, the morning. The conversation lasted until 2 in the morning, which was when Shin Yunya appeared in the living room, in her robe with the expression of a woman who had been awake and was choosing now to make that known, carrying a tray of things people needed. When they were talking through the architecture of what comes next, she set it down, looked at both of them. "Good," she said, and went back to bed. What they decided was not simple. Nothing worth doing is. Zara would not be a kept thing. That had never been on the table. And he had learned enough of her vocabulary to know it would never be. She would finish her degree. She would work in his organizations. Legitimate holdings, of which there were more than people assumed. And she would know them better than most. She would be herself, unedited in every room. He would not ask her to perform smallness. She would not ask him to pretend his world was other than it was. They would build something that had room for the truth of both of them, which was harder than any alternative, and the only one either of them was willing to accept. On Thursday morning at 7:43, the window booth was correctly set. The coffee was already poured. Shin Yunya was in the corner booth. She had apparently always preferred, hands folded around her tea, watching the door. Shin Yi-hyun arrived at 7:43 exactly. He sat, he looked at the coffee, looked at the woman who had poured it. Zara stood at his table, with her order pad and her apron, and the same composed, level expression she had been wearing. The morning, everything began. "Your usual," she said. "Or we have the special." It was not a question. It was the language of two people who have agreed on the true thing and are now deciding what to do with the rest of the morning, the rest of the week, the rest of whatever comes after. Two people stop performing and start choosing. He looked at her, the calculating look, and beneath it, no longer hidden, the thing that had been there since a morning in a diner, when a woman with a coffee pot had refused to make herself smaller. The special, he said, in the corner booth. Shin Yunya lifted her tea. Did not smile. Did not need to. She had been right. She was always right. About what mattered. About who her son needed. In his corner. About the woman who would not move. Outside, the city went about its ordinary business. Indifferent and continuous. Inside the golden spoon, something had been built. From a refusal and a first aid kit. And a grandmother's test. And two people choosing honesty over every easier option available. It wasn't a fairy tale. Both of them were too clear-eyed for that. It was something more durable. Something built not on rescue, or transaction, or the accident of one person needing, and another providing, but on the stubborn, deliberate work of two people who had looked at each other without their armor and decided to stay. Zara Mitchell refilled the coffee. Did not disappear. Had never intended to. Her grandmother would